Everyone seems to agree we don't want to renege on our debts. At the same time, it's not clear how we're going to avoid it. To take us through her approach to this, we welcome now Nicole Malliotakis. She's a Republican representative from New York and a member of the House Ways and Means Committee. So, Congresswoman, thank you so much for coming in. It's great to have you here.
It's great to be here.
So can you see a pathway forward? Because as I say, both Republicans and Democrats agree they don't want to renege on the debt.
Yeah.
But how you get there is not quite clear. Do you see a path?
I do see a path. I think that Speaker McCarthy has had successful conversations now with the White House. The White House is kind of changing its tune, saying it's willing to negotiate. And that's really what Republicans want. We want to make sure that we are putting forward an economic plan that puts us on the trajectory to reduce our debt, to balance our budget. When we have not passed a budget in 7 years, okay, it's always been a continuing resolution or a temporary spending plan, but we have not actually done a budget as we're supposed to do. And I think that that's the goal of the new Speaker, of the new House. And the bottom line is we cannot continue on the path that we're on, right? $31.5 trillion debt. We have, it's a 121% our GDP and the GDP ratio. So when you look at it from 20 years ago, the number was 60%, right? When the year I was born, 1980, it was about 35%. So we can't afford to continue down this path for future generations. And the reality is, if we do, a couple of decades from now, you'll be looking at maybe 70 cents of every dollar going to pay debt interest. And so that is what we're trying to rectify here, just being fiscally responsible.
And that point, I think, was driven home last week by the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office report, on the deficit and the debt, which shows that it's getting worse fast. Even over the course of the last year or so, we've added a fair amount. Mm-hmm. At the same time, if you look at the numbers, we just had the head of the CBO on yesterday, the additional deficit and debt actually does not come from discretionary spending. It comes from the so-called entitlements and interest payments. And so can we really have that discussion without discussing what I guess is a third rail in politics for both Republicans and Democrats, which is Social Security and Medicare, because that's really what's racking up the deficit and the debt over the next 10 years.
Well, look, Republicans have said we want to protect, we want to preserve Medicare and Social Security. Those are important programs that our seniors and our disabled rely on. The biggest thing threatening those programs is the unsustainable spending, generally speaking. The administration, with the one-party rule that they had last year, they increased spending $10 trillion. It was completely unsustainable. If you look at last quarter's debt payment, $215 billion, and that was the largest increase in one quarter ever on record. And so that's what we're trying to have a real conversation here. We could look at discretionary funding. We should look on how we can make sure that we're running mandatory spending in a responsible way. You know, there's a lot of waste. There's a lot of fraud in some programs. And the reality is that we have to find those savings, but not by cutting the payments that our seniors rely on or the programs that our disabled rely on. I'll just give you an example. Like, look at the COVID relief spending for the last couple of years. You know, hundreds of billions of dollars in wasteful spending there and fraud in the unemployment program, in the PPP program. People who truly needed those programs weren't able to get that funding. But that's across the board in all different agencies. Hundreds of billions of dollars that in this new report is unaccounted property under the Department of Defense. That's what we're really kind of looking at and saying we need to put in place certain measures to be responsible. And we need to do what the Republicans did when President Obama was president, which was put in place discretionary spending caps, as you say, which controlled spending and held the line for a decade following.
When you talk about that COVID spending, is that what you're on a select subcommittee on COVID crisis, as I understand it? Is that what you're looking at? What is the function of that committee? What do you hope to accomplish?
Yeah, the committee is going to be looking at a whole bunch of different things. But on the Ways and Means Committee, we specifically had a hearing on the unemployment fraud. Taxpayers should be shocked and disgruntled and angry, quite frankly, as I am, to find out that people took these international organizations, by the way, stole billions and billions of dollars. Also, people fraudulently made claims, then went on to buy $10 million villa in Dominican Republic or a mansion in New Jersey or Rolls Royces and Bentleys. That was what a lot of this money went to. So we need to put in those safeguards in place to make sure this does not happen. We have a couple of proposal ideas on how to do that going forward. But yes, the COVID Relief Committee is going to be looking at that, supporting what the Ways and Means Committee has already done, supporting what the Oversight Committee is doing. But we're also going to be looking at everything, right? From the origins of the virus, any taxpayer money that was funneled through EcoHealth Alliance from the NIH to Wuhan lab to support gain of functioning. We're going to be looking at school closures and the detriment that has had on our young people, how they are now behind and not learning at the level that they should be. We're going to be looking at the way that Governor Cuomo handled nursing homes, decisions that were made that were not in compliance with CDC regulations that led to thousands of nursing home deaths. We're going to be looking at a whole bunch of different things.
Congressman, I want to turn to one other subject before you leave, which is regulation or proposed regulation. There's a variety of regulations, particularly out of the SEC, that are being proposed that affect the financial community in ways that our audience pays attention to. One of them I know you've highlighted, which is really having to do with venture capitalists and perhaps liability for negligence. Give us a sense of where you think they are. As I understand, it's not a final reg yet, but it may become final as early as April.
Yeah, that is a proposed regulation that has come out of the SEC, which is a concern. Venture capitalists could be held liable if the investments fail, and obviously this would be a major problem. Look, they say it's high risk, high reward, and that's the whole purpose. You're trying to invest in new areas that people have not gone before, and particularly when we're talking about technology and AI, vaccines, all of that. Venture capitalists are willing to take those risks, and we can't allow this regulation to pass because it would definitely hinder investment in these important areas that we need to compete, particularly with China when it comes to defense and AI. So that is my concern with this regulation, and we need to at least have a real conversation about what the real-life impacts of this can be. There's already, in terms of fraud, obviously a lot of laws in place. It's overseen by the SEC, but we need to make sure that they're not hindering investment, as we're seeing so many other agencies under this administration come forward with regulations, with whether it's anti-energy policy that is hindering expansion and investment in our infrastructure or other areas where we need to be investing and expanding, not hindering and making us less competitive, particularly with adversaries like China.
Really important issue. There's no doubt about it. Thank you so much, Congresswoman. That's Representative Nicole Malliotakis from New York. Still to come, what President Biden accomplished